When I was an 8-year-old boy, I used to drive my family crazy. Whenever we would go out in my dad's blue Chevy station wagon, I would be glued to the window, watching and looking. And finally, I would see what I had been on the lookout for all the while. And I would shout, "Stop the car! Stop the car!" And my 4 brothers and sisters would say, "No! No!" My parents would sigh, "Oh, okay." And they would pull over, and I'd say, Thanks, Dad." And he'd say, "Michael, go, but be quick." And what I had seen was a pond. A pond often full of green, smelly, stinky algae. And I would take my Skippy peanut butter jar that I had washed out oh so carefully before the days of dishwashers, and I would run to the pond and kind of wade in and scoop up all the muck. And I would bring this back, and my brothers and sisters would say, "Really, Michael? Really? You smell. Your PF Flyers are full of muck." And I would say, "Yeah, but I got it. I had begged my parents to give me a microscope for Christmas. And I knew that when I got home, when I put that drop of water on the slide, it would be teeming with life. I spent many days and many nights building my slide library, looking at pond and pond and pond in the winter, in the summer, in the spring, and I was obsessed. I drove my brothers and sisters crazy because I was driven. I was driven by wonder. We know that wonder is super important in the sciences. The great astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson says, "I wonder every day, for wonder is the window that takes us from where we are to where we want to be." Many years later, I had a very different kind of wonder moment. I was sitting in a class where we were reading 17th and 18th century British poetry. Yeah. And I put up my hand and I said to the prof, "But how did this stuff get published? What was it like for the people who read it? How did they buy it? What was going on?" And he said, "Michael, come and see." And he took me into his office and he said to me, "What do you know?" And I said, "What do you mean? I don't know anything." And he said, "Excellent. That's a great place to begin." And I saw that he had a shelf of 17th and 18th century leather-bound books. And he started to pull them off the shelves. And he said, "Hey, look at this. This is an anti-piracy device. It's like a hologram on a credit card so that they can't copy the book. Only this was made in 1670. And then he picked up another book and he said, "Oh, look at this in raking light. You see, the printer was doing this on the cheap. He was cheating on the paper. This is third-rate stuff. Can you see? Oh, this one," he said. "Oh, they're cheating the other way." He said, "The guy wrote the book too short, and so now the printer is putting lines of blank leads between all the different lines of prose to make the book too long so they can sell it for more money." And I learned that day that authors do not write books. authors produce manuscripts that communities of makers turn into books. I learned that day that every book was a communal object made by paper makers and type founders, by compositors who were setting the type, by the pressmen who were pulling, by the children who were folding the sheets, and the men and women who were sewing them together and putting them in boards. That day, in that boring class, my professor told me that if you know how to read the whole book, every book is alive with the judgments of its makers. And to read the whole book is to learn how to discern the human presences in every historical text. I left that prof's office that day knowing that I, and probably you, had been cheated. Cheated because I had been handed the texts of history in boring textbooks, in anthologies, stripped out of all their color and historical particularity. They no longer had a local habitation and a name. It's like saying, we expect you to know about wheat, but we're only going to give you Wonder Bread. It's like inviting people to a banquet, and when you get there, all the food is white. That bland diet, that pablum that I had been fed in all these books was kind of boring because the strangeness of history, the specificity of a local time, and the decisions of communities of makers was completely gone. And I felt really cheated. Because a book, every book, is an expressive object. And you know this. We judge books by their covers all the time, and rightly so. You should judge a book by its cover. Don't judge a book by its movie, but definitely judge it by its cover. So if you go into the airport and you walk into the airport bookstore and you see a certain kind of book on the rack, and there's a picture on the cover of that book, and he's some kind of brawny man, he has no shirt on, right? And he's embracing this woman, and she's kind of falling out of her ball gown, and the plantation is burning in the background, right? You know what that book is. Not that we would read such books, certainly not. But you know that's a Harlequin romance, right? Yeah, and it's telling you, I am a Harlequin romance, you should buy me now, right? And you look at a different kind of book, and it's got those raised foiled letters on it, and maybe like an F-16 Phantom jet, or an AK-47, or maybe even a grenade. And you look at that, and you say, oh, I'll get that for my dad. It's a Tom Clancy novel. Yeah? Well, books are expressive forms. They tell us all the time about what they are and who they're for. They tell us about a price point and a readership and whether they're meant to endure or not. And that's true in our own time, and that was true way back in history. During the 1850s in America, books were gaudy. Book covers were bright red and green. They had gold stamping all over them. They were full of garlands and flowers. And then the Civil War broke out. And the mood of the nation changed. Brothers and fathers were dying. No publisher would produce a book with gold and flowers and bright colors. This is a book published in the Civil War. It's somber. It reflects the mood of a nation that is getting the dispatches from Fredericksburg and Antietam, that sees the casualty list from the Battle of Bull Run and can never, ever imagine their own happiness again. This book has nothing to do with the Civil War. It's the short stories of Nathaniel Hawthorne. But it has everything to do with the moment in which it was made. It has everything to do with the somber sensibility of a nation at war with itself. A book is a kind of a wormhole. It lets us travel in time, a portal into the past, that past, another country that we can go visit deeply and come home again to see our own world with new eyes. I teach a course called The History of the Book from Archimedes to the iPad. It's mostly for first-year students, and it meets entirely in special collections, and we look at stuff. And we try to learn how to read the whole book in all its gorgeous pluriformity. And the students are pretty cool around the seminar table. They're like, okay, yeah, all right, yeah, I read about that for the seminar, right? Yeah, okay, prof, I got that. But then, when I pick up my computer bag and I leave the classroom, they're out in the courtyard. Mom! King Lear, 1608, we were looking at King Lear, Shakespeare. It's a little pamphlet. It's a little pamphlet. And the printer, something or other, he didn't buy enough paper. And so the dude was editing Shakespeare to make it shorter so he could fit it all in. Mom, we've got it. I saw it. Shakespeare. It's one thing to tell your students, you need to be alive to the contingencies of human history. What? It's another thing to show your students how fragile Shakespeare is. Yeah? There is in our digital world a hunger for the object, for haptic knowledge, to hold it in your own hands, to turn the pages, to hold the book up to the light and to see the watermark, to smell the history. Not to fetishize, but to travel to another country, to be filled with wonder, to come home with new eyes, to be given the courage to understand. There is a hunger for the object. You go into the New York Public Library and you give them your address and proof of where you live, and you can look at all the old stuff. You go down the street into the Metropolitan Museum of Art and you start to pick up the vases and try to sleep in the Louis XIV's bed, they put you in jail. But with books, you can do this. You can live in the history of them so that you can understand your own time. I think we need to ask ourselves in this, our digital age, what is education for? We have made our students slaves to duty. We have made our children prisoners of diligence. And instead, we should be giving them love. We should be giving them the wonder, the window that takes them from where they are to where they want to go. What is our model of education today? It's a kind of a broadcast model. Wah, 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 wah. And we should be giving our students an experiential model to curate opportunities for wonder. Not everyone will work, but some of them will. And when you can get that student, that child, that boy, that girl, wonder happens, and the thirst to know begins. In many ways, I'm still that boy in my father's blue Chevy wagon, driving my brothers and sisters crazy. Stop the car! Stop the car, I say. Only now I say it to my students. I beg them, slow down. Slow down for wonder. If you look closely and slowly, the book is teeming with life. Go ahead, dive in.